Hello everyone. So this is the first lecture video on the chapter on motivation and emotions. In your chapter, in your textbook, it is in chapter 10, not chapter 8. There's a lot of content here. It's kind of a lengthy one, and I think that's because it appears to cover separate topics, one being motivation and one being emotion, but they really work very much together. So we're going to describe motivation. We're going to define it as simply goal-directed behavior. So when somebody says, are you motivated to do something, what they're really saying is that a goal, are you acting towards that goal, right? It's thought that, or we talk about motivation as having three separate, is it component? It's not components, three separate kinds of motivation. We have behavioral, which is a biological need for something such as thirst or sleep or hunger. You have an emotional, which is you have this, I don't know how to describe it, fear, sadness, grief, happiness, joy, humor. Those would all be considered emotional motivations. And then you have cognitive motivations, which are things like that you think, right? Things like I believe that I have to do this. I'm persuaded to do this. Those are a little bit different. Those are a little bit more difficult to discern exactly what's the difference between an emotional versus a cognitive. Motivation overall is a very difficult concept to be studied. In the lab. So most motivation researchers we infer it. So when they're studying motivation in mice, they can't ask the mouse on a scale of 1 to 10, how motivated are you to do something? Instead, they have to see like how hard do they work to get the food or to get through the maze, right? We talk about there being three kinds of motivation, three components, right? So it's sort of like there's these three steps. One is activation of the behavior. So I like to say this is getting yourself off the couch, right? This is I'm going to start, the starting the behavior. The other is persistence, like how hard do you work once you get off the couch? And then the third one, or sometimes persistence is how long do you work? And then intensity is how much effort, right, do you put into it? So you might think of it in terms of you're going to start an exercise routine, right? And so activation is the first time you go, persistence is how often you go, and intensity is how long are you at the gym when you get there. And these are I actually have a discussion post that I don't know if it's two separate discussion posts or just one, but one discussion post asks you, like this morning, when you got up, right? What motivated you to get out of bed? Was it a biological need? Was it a cognitive need? Did you think something? Was it an emotional need? Maybe you jumped out of bed because you were afraid, you hadn't heard your baby yet and you were fearful. I mean, I'll tell you what got me out of bed, and it was a biological need this morning. I had to pee, right? That's what got me out of bed. Maybe it's a cognitive need, and when the alarm goes off, you know that means that if you don't get to work, you're going to get fired. But then here's another thing: is that really a cognitive need, or is that an emotional need, right? So it's sort of an interesting thing to think about, like, why am I engaging in this behavior anyway? Is it out of fear? Is it because I have this craving? Like, here's a good one when you think about food. Like, why do people eat? Do you eat because you're bored, which would be a cognitive need? Do you eat because you're sad? That might be an emotional need. Or do you really eat because you're hungry? And I'm going to just guess that most people in this country probably eat for reasons other than absolute hunger. Okay, and then there's another post on there, another discussion post that asks you the same kind of question, except this one asks you about your homework. Like, what is the hardest for you in terms of your homework? Is the hardest part getting started on your homework? Is it harder to, once you get started, you just keep on working until you're done? Or is the hardest part sort of staying focused and actually working hard? Or do you maybe do one problem and then watch a show and then come back and watch another problem? I mean, I'll tell you, for me, it's really activation. Even when I come in the office, it's like I will stall and I will clean and I will file things before I'll actually bunker down to get work done. Once I start working, it's almost hard for me to stop. So I don't have any problem with persistence. And, you know, some days I'm a little bit more intense than other days, but the hardest part for me is just getting started. And I don't like it when my day comes to an end and I have to stop before I'm ready to stop, because persistence is not my problem. Okay, this next slide. So here's some different theories about motivation. I'm trying to think a couple really important terms here on this slide relative to, yep, see, I gotta move my, don't wanna like, okay. So you have a couple different theories about what motivates people, or what, um, what causes them to act, right? The theories of action. You have one theory which is called the instinctive theory, and this theory basically says that the reason that we do what we do is because we are biologically programmed. We just have these, what's it say, we're guided by evolutionary programming, and we're going to go through these motions because it's part of our DNA, it's part of our biology. And certainly we see this, you know, in the animal kingdom. We see birds who build nests before they lay eggs. We see birds fly south. We see mommy bunny rabbits, you know, pull their fur out to make their bed before their babies are born, right? They're not really cognitively thinking, oh, I have to keep my babies warm, but they have this pre-programmed biological rhythm of their life, right? Instinctually. And there are actually a couple things that we see in women. Like, one thing that pregnant women talk about is this nesting behavior. And in pregnant women, it often looks like, you know, cleaning or sorting or preparing the nursery, right? So that's thought of as sort of an instinctive behavior. But this theory doesn't go very far, because while it might explain some of our behaviors, how do you explain going to school or going to work, or, you know, or wanting to remain a graduate student for 20 years? Like, instinct theory doesn't really explain a lot of that. It might explain biological processes, it might explain things like eating or reproduction or even mate selection. But what about all those other activities that we do? Like going to the gym, like shopping, right? Doesn't explain all of that. So some other theories, right? And I'll offer you some other sort of theories that might do a better job. Then you have something called the drive theory. And a drive theory, so these first two are sort of biological. Drive theory is similar to instinct theory, but what it says is that the goal here, and this is an important word, that's why it's bolded, so make sure you know it right here, homeostasis. It's homeostasis. It's a bolded word. It'll show up on a quiz, right? Homeo meaning balance. So drive theory says is that all of our systems are designed, we're biologically compelled to stay in balance. And whenever we're out of balance, we are driven or pulled to do something to regain that homeostasis. So it's not so much like a drive, it's more like yeah, well, I guess it would be like a drive. It would be like a drag almost, right? So when we're thirsty, that drives us, that motivates us to find something to drink. When we're hungry, we're driven, we're pulled to find something to eat. And likewise, when we're sleepy, when we're tired, we are driven to find a way to sleep. But again, this theory only goes so far, right? And it only explains some of the biological processes. It doesn't really account for, are we driven to do our homework? Are we pulled to do our homework? Are we pulled to get a divorce? You know, it doesn't really explain some of those processes. It does, I think, explain really well why sometimes we're hungry for certain foods or thirsty for certain things, and how that can be, especially if you're profoundly sleep deprived, how you can just, like, the only thing you think about is sleep, right? Because it's driving you to sleep. This next theory, incentive theory, so where drive theory argues that you're pulled to do something, what incentive theory says, and that's what this one down here on the bottom is, it's supposed to illustrate incentive, is it says that you know, these biological processes, they explain some things, but that this theory is something that you're pushed to do. That what the reason we act is because there's something out there that we want, right? So in this image, you have him, I think it's money, right? That he's incentivized by some sort of external thing, and you're compelled to act because you want that thing. So you're constant. So, you know, you're no doubt familiar with the concept of incentivize, or when you incentivize something, you make it appealing, you make someone want to get it. You want, it's this idea that you want to people to be pushed towards it. They're incentivized to work harder to get a raise, to get an A, to, like, it's like the light at the end of the tunnel, right? That you're being pushed towards it. And of course, this was to say this works better when you get what you think you're going to get. What we have talked about, I think, in another chapter probably, is that rewards only. So what is there? I think the research says specifically that rewards work best when they happen intermittently. So if you always get a reward, right? When you're no longer interested in that reward, you're going to stop acting. But if you're not sure if you're always going to get a reward, you will continue to engage in the behavior. If, on the other hand, you quit getting the reward ever, you're going to stop doing that behavior. I always think of Panera Bread on this one. So, you know, if you've ever had a Panera Bread membership card, or I don't know if they still do it, I haven't gone there in a long time, but like it seemed to me when you first got your card, every other time I went in, I'd get a reward or I'd get a discount, but not every time, because that's the way incentives work. If you win every time, they lose their incentive value. When they're unpredictable, it's sort of like gambling, right? You'll work harder when it's unpredictable, but you have to get it enough. So there's this like sweet spot, but I'm digressing just a little bit. And then a theory that I think is kind of interesting to talk about is this one called arousal theory. And what arousal theory tells us, so there's another bolded term on here, sensation seekers. And it says that what motivates people to act is they're trying to optimize their arousal. In other words, some people have a higher, like, their optimum arousal state is more intense. I'm having a hard time. So let me just explain it like this. So like my husband has a very low optimum arousal. A good time for him is to come home and watch reruns of Star Trek. That's what he considers to be a good time. I find that a little boring sometimes. My optimum arousal state is a little bit higher than that, right? So you might be somebody that's like a go, go, go. You constantly like excitement. And other people might kind of be more of a homebody and they like to just sit at home. And that's really what we mean by this arousal theory, is some folks have a higher, that there's this optimum, and we will work until we get to that perfect spot of arousal. And sometimes that may mean that we have to look for things to do, and other times that may mean people try to cancel plans because that's above my optimum arousal. That's too much arousal for me, and I don't want to do that, right? On the other hand, people might be like, I need more to do, right? When we say that we're bored, I always find that an interesting topic. What exactly does that mean, to be bored, right? And what is wrong with being bored? Well, if you have a low optimum arousal, boredom is fine. If you have a high optimum arousal, boredom is bad. I'm noticing that I'm already at 12 minutes, but it would be nice if I could just get through this slide before I stop. Yes, okay. So this slide are a couple other theories of action, specifically the humanistic theory of action and the evolutionary theories of action. What the humanistic theory of action says is, so back to chapter 1 when we were talking about humanism and the humanistic philosophy, and really a lot of humanist psychologists, they're all about motivation. And they talk about how motivation is the way that we think. Later in this chapter, I want to make sure that I'm right here, so I'm going to scroll over here. Later in this chapter, we're going to talk specifically about Maslow's hierarchy of need, which we mentioned previously in the semester, but I wanted to spend more time really getting into it. And what Maslow argues, so his is a humanist, and he argues that motivation is guided by a level of need, right? So we're talking about theories of action. So depending on what you need, and your needs may be personal, they may be safety and security, they may be social, but it's our culture that sort of molds whatever our needs are, and those needs will then direct us. They will guide our behavior. At the most fundamental level, the most important need from a humanist perspective is safety and security. So until they feel safe, right, and not afraid, they won't be motivated. Their behavior will not be directed towards anything else until they feel safe. Once we felt safe, then we may be looking for material comforts like food and maybe a nice place to live, right? I think that's how it goes. And then, so the basic safety, security, food, water, we have those things met. And now we might notice that we're lonely, because until we're out of the rain, so to speak, until we're out of the tornado, until we're out of the storm, and we're no longer getting pelted by hail, we're not really thinking about other people, right? And once we feel safety, then we're going to notice that, hey, I'm alone here, and we're going to start looking for each other. And then eventually, once we have each other, we may want to build something together, right? We may want to create society or build a structure or kind of anchor in place. And that's really what the humanists, and I know I'm just barely scraping the surface, but the idea is that we're not all, unless our basic needs are met, we're not going to be interested in our education, in improving our relationships, in participating in the political system. We're not going to vote if I don't have a place to live, right? Because my behavior is directed towards more basic, salient, immediate needs. If I don't know where I'm going to sleep tonight, I ain't thinking about next week. I'm not thinking about my homework. I am thinking about the here and the now, and that is where my behavior is directed, my goal-directed behavior. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. And then another set of theories, the evolutionary psychological theories, here the evolutionary ones. What this set of theories says, and that's a great little video I'll hook up for you. What these theories say is that all of our behaviors are motivated by whatever is necessary for our species to survive. So we will be guided by dominance, aggression, sex, and being affiliation motive. What the affiliation motive says is that because we're social animals, that our behavior and solitude is not how we're programmed. We are built to be in the company of people, that our goal-directed behavior we will do whatever it takes to be in the company of people. Now think about middle school or elementary school and the loner kid, the kid that was kind of weird maybe, or the kid that was socially isolated. And you may have noticed they may have acted out in order to get attention. From the evolutionary psychological theory, that's because they were driven by their affiliation motive. They would do whatever it takes to be with people, because one of the fundamental survival behaviors of ours is to be in the company of people, right? And we will then, within those connections of other people, we may act out in dominant and aggressive ways, because it's about survival and it's about passing my genes into the next generation, right? So first I'm in the company of, I hope I'm making some sense, but the idea is that when we observe people's behavior, what am I trying to say? When we observe people's behavior, we must consider if their behavior is not part of their evolutionary programming to be in the company of each other, of other people, and then to protect if they're feeling threatened, right? If someone is criticizing them or they're feeling threatened, they may act out with dominance and aggression, right? And that would be part of this evolutionary model here. They might act aggressively, get angry because evolutionarily they're feeling threatened, right? Their survival is being threatened. Or we might get really randy, otherwise known as horny, right? And that's part of our programming too, is that we will expend effort to find a mate and to mate with that mate, because that is part of our evolutionary programming, right? So I think it's kind of a neat theory to think about, that so much of what we do is because we're these human animals. And I'm going to stop it right there. This one's gone on quite long. And when I come back, I'm going to talk about some of the theories behind why we eat.